We're going to do at least one question in the Catechism on the Constitution first. The laws of nature, a significant slice, a solid stepping stone as we move through the history of our common law tradition. One of the solid stepping stones, of course, is our United States Constitution. But it's a very thin slice of our common law, because it is that slice of our common law that pertains to our common law being applied to government, to limit government. It's not as it's applied to us. 271. Thank you, Miss Francine. Let me do this one question. Maybe you can have we just played a song, didn't we? Yeah, we did. Let's do a question. 271. Is it a wise regulation, a wise law, that 12 men just happen to be standing around that may or may not have any qualifications to sit in judgment on another man's life, liberty, or property, are allowed to do so? 12 men who have no qualifications, no expertise in law, some of them not even a requirement that they have to be able to read and write. And they are impaneled to sit in judgment over the wealthy man's and any other man's life in a criminal case, liberty in a criminal case, or property in a criminal or a non-criminal case, in fines or the power of the government to force somebody to give somebody money in damages or in a contract action to fulfill it. When you go to court, the reason you go to court, watch me, don't miss this. You're at a non-criminal case or a criminal case, you're asking the court let me put it this way. I've got to say it right. This is our common law tradition. You're asking the court to ask the executive branch of government to use force and threat of force to get what you want. If it's a prosecutor in a criminal case, they're asking the court to ask the executive branch of government to take the life, liberty, or property of the person, the man they're prosecuting. Or they're asking the jury in that case. It always comes down to the jury if you want a jury. In a non-criminal case, you're still asking the court to ask the executive branch to use force or threat of force to take the property of another person and give it to you. But it always comes down, criminal or non-criminal case, you're asking the court to request from the executive branch to do that. That's our common law tradition. So you're not asking the court to use force or threat of force, because fundamentally the common law courts have no direct power of force or threat of force. We were talking to Sheriff Dar yesterday. The courts come to him and ask him, he's the sheriff, to enforce their commands. The court in the states don't have power to enforce their commands unless the sheriff agrees that that's lawful, and he does it. You see the importance of separation of powers? When a federal court wants force or threat of force to enforce its decrees, who do they go to? They've got to ask the executive branch. More to the point, they ask a U.S. Marshal. What branch of government is the U.S. Marshal Service? They're under the President of the United States, the executive branch. When the federal court or state court in a criminal case, if the jury delivers the death penalty, then the court asks the executive branch to put the person on death row and execute them. But he's got to ask the executive branch. He doesn't have the judge doesn't have the power to do that. Separation of powers. No, that's the executive branch. See how important that is? And if the executive branch doesn't want to do it for some reason, he won't. I've used the example of George Ryan, governor of Illinois. He did a study. A study was done at his behest. The legal beagles that work for him, they said, we've got a lot of folk on death row in the state of Illinois. And we see, after we examine the record, that Due process wasn't followed, and they shouldn't be here. Due process wasn't followed, therefore, they shouldn't even be here. Their convictions should be overturned. Therefore, for right now, we're not executing anybody ever until you fellows prove to us, the courts, you other fellows, you prove to us that you're following due process in these capital cases. And until you do, said George Ryan, I'm not executing anybody. That's our common law tradition, see? Separation of powers. They don't have to agree if each one of them doesn't want to. You see the value of that? It stifles government. We want government to be stifled. We want government, the branches of government, to be at odds with one another quite a bit. Because if they're fighting each other, says James Madison, called the framer of our Constitution, if they're stifling each other, fighting among themselves, they leave us alone, and we're free to do as we please, to do what we think is right. When you hear somebody say, why can't we just get along and work for the American people? Mark it down. They're working for the devil, not working for the American people. What does it mean when the Democrats said, why can't we just get along? Well, what that means is you do what? You go along with us and we won't fight. That's what that means. We don't want them to not be fighting. We want them. We have a two-party system. Our common law is an adversarial tradition. That means we fight all the time. Gets old, doesn't it? Fussing and fighting all the time. Huh. Well, we could be like Europe was for centuries. There was no fussing and fighting. Everybody did what the Pope said and no problem. Trouble is, in that kind of a world, people get burnt at the stake if you don't agree, and you don't have freedom. You live in fear. We don't want to live in that kind of a world. Well, I don't. There are plenty of people that do. Don't kid yourself. One of the things I learned when I got into politics, I was new at it. I didn't have a clue what was going on. Boy, did I learn a lot about what politics really is. I'll tell you what I found out. I found out that people that vote, over half of them, are viciously, almost murderously wrong-headed. By and large, we call them Democrats these days. They want to murder babies and they want to be taxed. Insane, isn't it? No, it's true. I thought, shucks, I'll run for Congress. I'll tell them any monkey could go to Congress. Any monkey could go to Congress. And when a tax vote comes up, you can train the monkey to punch the no button for your vote. It's that simple. Just punch the no button. I thought, shoot, this is easy. I can get into office. The guy I'm running against, he votes for every tax that comes down the line. This will be easy. Well, I campaigned on that for a long time, and I went to this little restaurant. There were 27 counties in the district. It was a huge district. It was the largest congressional district geographically east of the Mississippi River. The only other two districts that rivaled our district in size, geographic size, was the 2nd District of Maine. And I used to say there were more moose in that district than people. It was true. And there was another district that had moose in it that was a large one, and that was the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Up there, two parts of Michigan, the Lower Peninsula and the Upper Peninsula, between the Great Lakes, call them peninsulas because there's water on three sides. That's what a peninsula is. Well, we were large, so I just traveled around these districts, and it was rural. There were no cities. Most the television stations that were the broadcast into the district from the outside. So if you bought television ad time, which we did, hundreds of thousands of dollars of it, half of it went outside the district. So we tried to concentrate more on radio because radio was inside the district. You got more bang for your buck. Paducah, Kentucky, Terre Haute, Indiana, St. Louis, Missouri, Decatur. Those are all television stations around the district. In the middle of the district, you couldn't hardly get television. Well, I was down to one of those places in the middle of the district where you didn't get television. Yeah. Oh, it was a nice place. And it was a rural, just lost my picture again, a rural area, of course. A lot of farms, a lot of coal mines in this little county that time. And there was a restaurant down there, and there was a man there that had four daughters that owned the restaurant, had four daughters. They were all teenage daughters. They were all redheaded, and everybody thought they were beautiful. Well, not to say that they could have been brunette and been beautiful or blonde, but they happened to be redheaded. His family was, and they were beautiful. And the girls were the waitresses. So it was a popular place. Men would go there and they just liked those girls. They were sweet girls. Not only were they pretty, they were just refreshing to be around because they were young and innocent and kind. They hadn't got cynical yet, see? They weren't cynical. And the guy that owned the place was a Republican, and he supported me. And Republicans hung out there too. And it was a Republican county, so he wasn't hurting for business, that's for sure. But it was one of those kind of places you go in, there were checkered tablecloths on all the tables, and the cooking was home cooking. They called it the home cooking restaurant. I think that's what they called it, something like that. So I went down there and I'd hang out there because I'd get to see all the people I wanted to see, and then people would gossip about me and talk. Oh, Winters was over at the home cooking restaurant, and we got to talking to him, and he said this and he said that. That's what you're looking for. See, a lot of gossip and jabber if you're running for office. Well, I was there. Of course, the four daughters were serving everybody, and people were calling them by name, and of course, they enjoy the attention. And I got ready to leave, and I thought, well, I'll go in the back. And if you go back in the kitchen and talk to the cooks and the folk that work back there, well, they appreciate that. And they'll talk about it too. I always tried to go, if I'd ask permission from the owner, can I go back and talk to folk in the kitchen real quick and say hi to them? And I did. And there was one cook back there that didn't have a good attitude. And I thought, well, I'll just tell them that if they, well, what can you do for us? And I'll say, well, I can lower your taxes. But what I said was, in this case, I said, I want to introduce legislation that does not allow the government to tax you on your tips. Now, have you noticed that was 30 some years ago, 35 years ago? DJ Trump has now put that in place, or he's trying to put that in place in the federal tax system. No more tax on waitresses' tips. Well, we were saying that a long time ago, but it was kind of a new idea. I didn't realize how popular taxes were. And this woman said to me, and she cursed. She said, blankety blank, if I'm going to pay taxes, everybody else is going to pay taxes as much as me or more. She was ticked that I said that. Well, see, she was actually envious of the waitresses because I said that about them. I'm going to try to take that away. Shouldn't be taxing tips. That's insane. And then also said, if at that time, I said, if you make less than $30 a year, there won't be any income tax. That's what I want to introduce in Congress. Well, now I noticed that that's being floated pretty popularly too. Now that times have changed, people are not as really they aren't. People are not as socialist, not as not as democracy minded. No, they aren't. No, they're more common law minded now. They're not for the majority crushing their rights because they got 51%. They're more constitutionally minded, saying, no, there's a limit. I don't care what the majority says. Well, but at that time, I found out that there's a lot of people out there that want everybody to be taxed. It makes them feel good. That's the only way they think they can get back at people they're envious of. The only way is to say, tax them more. I'll pay the taxes just so they have to. What's that? Well, that's like burning down your house to kill a rat. I'll pay the taxes and stay under oppression, but I want you to be under oppression like me. I want you to be as miserable as I am. That's what the Democrat Party, oh yeah, them and a whole lot of other people, that's what the Democrat Party pushes and promotes. You're a victim and everybody else has to be as miserable as you. Am I a victim? I've been a victim of a lot of things. So have you, I'm sure. I remember when Charlton Heston was doing fundraisers for the fellow that was running for U.S. Senate, near where I was. They put on a big event for him, and there was a fellow had a lot of money. He somehow got a hold of Charlton Heston and wanted him to come in and be a speaker at the fundraiser. I know I've told you this story. They asked me to introduce Heston. I never met the man. I knew who he was for sure. But I went back and read his recently written autobiography in preparation of introducing him, try to understand more about him. I didn't know much about him, except I knew he was in a movie, played Moses in the Ten Commandments, that famous movie, and a whole lot of other movies. The Greatest Show on Earth with Jimmy Stewart and some other famous people. Gary Cooper. Well, what I discovered was, looking more deeply into him, his life, and what he wanted to do. What he wanted to do through the medium of the movies, he was kind of like John Wayne in this way. John Wayne saw movies as a powerful tool for right, what he believed to be right. Most of Hollywood didn't see it that way. John Wayne and the director, Ford, that worked with Wayne all those years, that's the way they saw it. You know, they did movies like How Green Was My Valley, about that coal mining town in Wales. The Seekers, John Wayne. She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. All those kind of movies. And in those movies, John Wayne wouldn't take a script. John Wayne was offered the part for High Noon, one of the most famous Westerns ever done. Gary Cooper took the part. John Wayne wouldn't take it. Why wouldn't he take it? He read the script. He said, this movie presents the American male as though he's a coward. In general, it presents the American male as though he is a coward. And if you tell the American male he's a coward, you tell him enough, he'll start to believe it and he'll become a victim. And that's what that movie was about. That's true. Gary Cooper took the part. John Wayne and Gary Cooper were pretty close buddies. John Wayne used to say, well, Coop and I, he called him Coop and I both fell off of horses and landed on movie sets, and we've been here ever since. And it was fundamentally true. Cooper grew up on a ranch in Montana. His parents were immigrants from Britain. John Wayne rode an old mare to school. And, he was from Iowa. You could say Winterset or Winterset, Iowa. I think they say Winterset up there. And then his dad later on moved to Southern California before anybody really lived there. Kind of out in the dry land, and he rode a horse to school every day. And when he got to town, there was a fire station there, a volunteer fire station, and John Wayne's, his name was Morrison, really, but his dog would follow him to school. And they called the dog Duke. No, John called his dog Duke. That was it. And so the firemen at the volunteer fire department in this little town got to calling him Duke. And people have been calling him Duke ever since. He's gone now. But they saw movies as a powerful tool. Well, Heston saw movies the same way. There was parts he wouldn't take. And when you look at his life, and I was able to examine it in his autobiography, I saw that he always played the part of an underdog in many ways, not always, but a lot, who overcame in the end, overcame his own weaknesses, overcame the criticism and the hatred of others, and did some heroic thing for a moment. He rose among the mundane, and like a bolt of lightning, he lit up the sky, lit up everything down below where everybody could see it, and then he fell back to earth, and he was back to being immortal again. That's what a hero is. He spent his life trying to say that God uses men to do that sometimes. It's not that he makes them gods, but he lifts them up. They do some heroic thing, and then they fall back to earth. A lot of people do that, friends, and nobody ever knows. That's true too. You don't always see it like a bolt of lightning. A lot of folk just do heroic things and overcome quietly. Probably most people do. And they're never recognized. God may get the glory, but they're never recognized for what they've done. Well, the jury. Yeah, the jury is justified. As we'd said, it comes from the Bible. And the verdict of the jury is they're the final arbiter, the final decider of right and wrong, and they're, as arbiter, not required to give their reasons for their decision. And they can make any decision they want. They can deny the law if they want. They can come back as Justice Holmes says, in the teeth. A jury can bring a verdict back lawfully within the teeth of both the facts of the case and the law. That's not anybody else's business but theirs, and they don't have to give the reason if they don't want to. That's called a lawgiver. That's called final. And the verdict of the jury is final, says our Constitution of the United States, as long as the due process of our common law was filed in its impaneling, etc. So it's a good thing that we have the jury, and that was the question he asked here. Is this a wise regulation? Yes, and the jury, says Justice Scalia, is the badge of our attitude that we don't trust judges. It's the badge of our attitude that we don't trust judges. Now, I'd said last time or yesterday, G.K. Chesterton is nice about it. He says we don't trust judges, though, because they're so used to it. They get hardened to it. We want folks that still have sensibilities. They're not legal beagles. They're not law experts. They're not magistrates, sheriffs. They don't work in that system. Bailiffs. You work in a system long enough, you get objectively hard to